Welcome to Infinite Universe with interesting episode. Frank Fritz was not your average collector, and his garage wasn't just a place to park old cars. It was a world of its own, full of secrets, stories, and mystery. When news of Frank's passing spread, most people mourned the loss of a beloved television personality and vintage enthusiast. But what came next took everyone by surprise, even the police. His garage, locked up and silent for years, was finally opened. Inside, they expected to find classic cars and forgotten relics. But what they discovered was something entirely different. It was a vehicle that shouldn't have existed. A mysterious car hidden away, covered in dust and shadow, which baffled even experienced professionals. And what made it even stranger was the handwritten note Frank left behind, hinting that there was more to the story than anyone had realized. Frank was driven by an obsession that went far beyond simple collecting. He didn't just find cars, he hunted them. He followed rumors, searched barns, junkyards, and forgotten corners of America to find vehicles that had long been left behind. His passion was clear from the first time viewers saw him on American Pickers. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing meaning. For Frank, every rusted bumper and broken engine had a story. While most people saw him as the quiet guy with deep knowledge of vintage signs and car parts, true fans recognized that sparkle in his eye when he found something special. It was in those moments when he spotted a hidden gem buried under weeds or layers of dust that he truly came alive. Over the years, Frank built a collection that was more about heart than showmanship. He didn't keep his cars in a fancy showroom with ropes and lights. Instead, they lived in a modest garage in Iowa, a place that felt more like a shrine to American automotive history. There were treasures like a 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air, which he loved for its clean lines and iconic tail fins. He owned a 1967 Ford Fairlane GT390, which he bought for $7,000 and personally restored, pouring another $4,000 into bringing it back to life. Then there was the luxurious 1960 Cadillac Fleetwood that he picked up with his longtime friend Mike Wolfe, a car that represented the peak of American style. But Frank didn't stop there. He was willing to spend big when it mattered. He owned two 1954 Nash Healey sports cars, which cost him $46,000 together. He tracked down a 1914 Met cycle car, a rare three-wheeled vehicle from another era, worth $35,000. His crown jewel, however, was a 1947 Cisitalia Nuvolari Spider, a rare Italian post-war masterpiece worth more than $500,000. Each car was like a chapter in a book he was writing, a book filled with rust, chrome, and stories. Frank didn't buy cars to flip them for a profit. He bought them because they meant something. He saw value where others saw junk. He didn't brag. He didn't build an online empire or show off his finds to the world. His garage was his world, and very few people were ever invited inside. Friends said he could spend entire days in there, just him and his cars. He tinkered, he restored, and sometimes he just sat in silence. In a world where everything is posted online and shared for likes, Frank was different. He kept his world private. And that's why his death left behind so many questions. As he grew older, Frank slowly stepped away from the spotlight. By 2020, he quietly left American Pickers, citing back surgery and health problems. At the time, many thought he'd be back. But behind the scenes, things were falling apart. His health wasn't improving, and he became more withdrawn. He stopped answering calls, limited visits, and spent most of his time alone. But he never stopped collecting. Even while sick and mostly homebound, he kept buying cars. Sometimes he sent someone else to check them out. Other times, he bought them without seeing them in person. He trusted his gut. He had done this for decades, and he knew what he was doing. One of his final purchases was a strange-looking vehicle with no chrome, no muscle, just a strange shape and faded paint. When asked about it, Frank only said, "It's older than you think." Then he rolled it into his garage and shut the door. That was over a year before he died. It wasn't just the cars that made people wonder. There were whispers. Rumors said Frank was after something bigger. Some believed he was collecting cars tied to American myths, rare prototypes, secret models, cars that were said to have vanished. Others said he was in touch with someone who had access to a long-lost factory model no one had seen since the 1960s. Frank never confirmed anything, but he left behind strange clues. To one friend, he said, "There's something in that garage that'll outlive all of us." To another, he said, "If they ever open that garage without me, tell them I left everything behind." Most people thought he was just being poetic. But when he died, and his property was passed on to lawyers and investigators, attention turned to that locked garage. It had been sealed under court order, untouched for months. Finally, the estate attorney arrived with the key. The garage looked ordinary from the outside: a steel frame, some ivy, and a side door with a dent. But when they lifted the main door, dust came pouring out like smoke. Inside, 8 vehicles were lined up. Some were under tarps. Others were uncovered. The 1956 Bel Air was there, turquoise paint faded but intact. The Fairlane was next to it, still bold despite the dust. The Cadillac Fleetwood stood like a silent king in the back. It was like walking into a museum that had been frozen in time. But there was something else. Near the back wall, parked sideways under a top stained with oil, was a car that no one recognized. It didn't look like anything from Frank's known collection. Its shape was strange, low, curved, and wide in the back. One officer slowly peeled off the top. Underneath was what looked like a Corvette, but not any model anyone had ever seen. It had the spirit of a 1963 Grand Sport, but with more aggressive lines. It looked hand-built. Experimental. The nose dipped too low. The back was unusually wide. It had no visible VIN plate. Just a small brass tag riveted to the firewall with numbers that didn't match any GM record. They called it in. The estate lawyer took notes. No one touched it after that. But the mystery lingered in the air. Above the workbench, taped to the wall and barely visible through the grime, was a note. The ink had faded, but it still read, "I left behind everything there. Frank." No one knows exactly what he meant by everything. But those who were there say it felt like a final message. Like Frank wanted someone to find it. A local mechanic later said the car looked like it had been built as a prototype, a one-of-a-kind piece never meant for public eyes. It shouldn't have existed. But somehow, Frank found it. And he kept it hidden. That garage wasn't just a place full of old cars. It was a record of a man's life. A life spent chasing memories, rescuing history, and protecting stories that the world had forgotten. Even in death, Frank left behind a mystery. A secret. A message that some things are worth saving, even if no one else remembers they existed. The strange car remains under investigation, and experts are still trying to figure out where it came from, who made it, and how Frank ended up with it. But maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what Frank wanted. A life lived quietly, passionately, and always just a little out of reach. A story told not with words, but with gears, steel, and the whisper of tires on an old, cracked road. And in the end, Frank Fritz gave the world one last surprise, a hidden masterpiece, waiting in the shadows, ready to tell its story to anyone willing to look close enough. This was more than a garage. It was the soul of a man who believed in second chances, for people, for memories, and for machines left behind. And that's a legacy far greater than anyone ever expected. But with inconsistencies that didn't make sense, everything about the car felt strange. Only 5 original Grand Sport Corvettes were officially produced, and all of them were accounted for. Yet here was one more, or something incredibly similar, hidden under a tarp in the back of Frank Fritz's private garage. It didn't look like something that should be there. And what made it even more baffling was that Frank never told anyone about it. He never mentioned it on television, in interviews, or even to his close friends. The garage that no one was allowed to enter had finally revealed its first mystery. But that was only the beginning. Because what Frank left behind wasn't just a collection, it was a puzzle. A challenge. And it quickly began to pull in experts, collectors, and skeptics, all trying to figure out how a man who spent his life searching for hidden treasures might have stumbled across something that one of the biggest car companies in America may have wanted forgotten forever. When they opened Frank's garage after his death, they expected to find some rare and beautiful vehicles, his known favorites like the 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air, the 1967 Ford Fairlane GT390, the pair of 1954 Nash Healey sports cars, and even the legendary 1947 Cicitalia Nuvolari Spider. These were all well documented, known to collectors and fans alike. But they didn't expect what was hidden in the very back, beneath a faded, oil-stained top. It was a car that didn't belong. A vehicle that no one had ever seen before. At first glance, the shape looked familiar. It had a low profile, a sleek fiberglass body, and exaggerated fenders. Clearly, it was a Corvette. But it didn't look like any model you'd find in a catalogue or museum. When they removed the top, confusion quickly took over. The car's body resembled a 1963 Grand Sport, a Corvette built for racing, so rare that only 5 were ever made before the project was cancelled. But those 5 had been accounted for. If this was another Grand Sport, then something didn't add up. There was no standard VIN number. Instead, there was a small brass plate, hand-stamped with strange numbers and the words experimental use only. The body looked authentic. The fiberglass seemed to match the era. The frame didn't show up in any known registry. And slowly, everyone started to realize what they were looking at might not just be rare, it might be unique. Frank never said a word about this car while he was alive. He had spent years sharing stories and finds with fans all over the world, but this car he kept secret. It was as if he was hiding it for a reason. And then, above his old workbench, someone found a note in Frank's handwriting, slightly faded and yellowed with age. It read, "I left behind everything there." At first, it felt like a heartfelt goodbye. But now, with the mysterious car sitting in the garage, the message felt more like a clue. The Corvette didn't just raise questions. It changed everything. Here was a car that no one could place in any history book, no matter how many records they searched. It wasn't just rare. It wasn't supposed to exist at all. Some experts started to believe it might be one of the long-rumored lost mule cars, vehicles built alongside the Grand Sports for testing but never officially released. Others suggested it was a one-off car built in secret by engineers who had access to original Corvette molds, hidden away for decades. If any of those theories were true, then Frank Fritz had stumbled onto something that even General Motors might not have wanted rediscovered. Frank had clearly known what he had. He didn't register it. He didn't insure it. He kept it in the deepest, darkest part of his garage like something that needed to be protected. Not as a centerpiece. As a secret. And now that secret was finally out. Once the news spread, the automotive world went into overdrive. Corvette historians, classic car experts, and online forums exploded with theories. General Motors said nothing, refusing to make any public comment. That silence only fueled more speculation. Could it be that more Grand Sports had been built than originally claimed? Maybe they were stored off the books and later scattered quietly after the program was cancelled. If Frank's car was one of them, it would mean he had uncovered a part of Corvette history that was never meant to see the light of day. The story only deepened. Rumors swirled that Frank had purchased the car from a retired GM engineer sometime in the early 2000s. Another version claimed he picked it up at an estate sale in Flint, Michigan, close to the heart of GM's operations. Nothing was ever confirmed. But it all fit with the kind of collector Frank was. He never needed attention or praise. He liked the rare, the overlooked, and the nearly forgotten. And this car, if it really was what people thought it was the ultimate find. Even more unsettling than the car itself was the complete silence that surrounded it. There were no photos of it during Frank's life. No friends recalled seeing it. No one even remembered him mentioning it. It was like it had been completely erased from his public story, hidden by choice. It made people wonder whether Frank had always planned for it to stay hidden. Or maybe he wanted it to be found only after he was gone, like one final treasure left behind for the world to uncover. That note above the workbench took on new meaning. Maybe it wasn't just about the car. Maybe it was about everything in that garage. Everything Frank had loved, protected, and kept secret. As the story made its way around the globe, offers began to come in. Museums wanted to display the car. Private collectors were willing to pay millions even without solid documentation. One international buyer reportedly offered a blank check. But the estate held back. They wanted answers first. Experts were brought in, but no one could agree on what the car actually was. The craftsmanship was too precise for a replica, too obscure for a factory build. Every weld, every contour, every detail told a story, one that only the original builder would know. And Frank? He said nothing. In every episode of American Pickers, in every interview, every public appearance, there was never a hint that he had something like this. He kept that part of his life completely separate. And maybe that was the point. Maybe he didn't want it found. Or maybe he wanted it found in the right way, by people who would understand what it meant. The car itself might never be officially identified. It might stay in legal limbo for years, its true story hidden beneath layers of guesswork and speculation. But that might have been exactly what Frank intended. Some things, he believed, were worth finding. But not necessarily explaining. Maybe this car wasn't a prize. Maybe it was a message. A final example of the kind of discovery Frank dedicated his life to making. It wasn't about being the biggest, fastest, or most expensive. It was about the story. The mystery. The unknown. Even after estate lawyers and experts catalogued everything, that car remained untouched. Silent. Powerful in its mystery. And it wasn't just about the fiberglass and the engine anymore. It was about what it symbolized. Frank Fritz had lived his life differently. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He didn't seek the spotlight. He collected because he believed in rescuing pieces of history. And in that dusty garage, he left behind something that did exactly that. A car no one had expected. A secret that would outlive him. That garage, with its old oil cans, rusted license plates, and the smell of time passing slowly, had been more than just a workspace. It had been Frank's world. A place where the past was always welcome and where every object told a story. That unknown car, whether it was real, fake, or something in between, was now part of that story. And no matter what experts eventually say, it will always carry the weight of being the final piece in a life built on finding the extraordinary in the forgotten. In the end, Frank left behind more than a collection. He left behind a legacy. A message that not everything needs to be seen, labeled, or proven. Some things are worth keeping secret. Some stories are best told in whispers. And some mysteries are meant to be discovered, not solved. The car that shouldn't exist is now part of that legacy. And maybe that's exactly where it belongs. Thanks for watching. Keep it and stay tuned. Like and subscribe our channel. Have a good day.